This is Railway Conversations with Doc Frank, and I'm Sean Connolly.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Doc Frank, and my guest today is Sean T. Connolly, born and bred in Australia, but now living in Malaga, Spain. Sean has had a lot of involvement in high-speed rail projects all over the world, including, of course, Spain, where he lives at the moment. But, of course, as a born Australian, he's also greatly interested in what's currently happening with the planning of high-speed rail in Australia. This is a longer conversation, which I will bring to you in two parts. In today's part one, we're discussing already a number of very interesting topics for anybody with a stake in high-speed railways, including, for example, the difference between high-speed rail and regional fast rail, why higher speed is not always a better solution, the balance between speed, construction cost, and journey time, how the HS2 project in England ended up with a gold-plated solution for very high-speed rail. What could be the most comparable high-speed line as a reference for the planned Sydney to Melbourne project in Australia, and the realism of journey time claims, and a lot more. Please enjoy this episode. This podcast is not sponsored by third parties, which means uninterrupted listening to the episodes for you, and I hope you appreciate and enjoy that. If you want to support the show to keep it going, there are two ways you can do it. One is the typical request for podcast: subscribe and share with your friends. The other one is specific to the show and myself. I host a training portal with arguably the world's most comprehensive course offer on digital signaling technologies and everything to do with high capacity. Some of my trainings are one of a kind, which means unique in the world. For example, the high capacity signaling blueprint, the high capacity railway mindset training, or most recently, my course about digital signaling interoperability. All of those courses are online, so you can watch the lessons at times convenient for you and as often as you like. And there is an industry-leading Q&A support where I will answer your questions not just during your training, but at least for further 12 months after you completed your course. What you can do that would be really nice is checking out this training portal, which you find at docfranktraining.podia.com. That is docfranktraining.podia.com. And if you find that you or a coworker of you can benefit from any of those courses, I would be very happy to see you growing your knowledge, understanding, and confidence through any of my trainings. Thank you. But now, please do enjoy this episode. Sean, welcome to the show.
Hi, very many thanks, Frank. It's a great honor to be here today, and thanks for the invitation.
You're very welcome. You were a very active participant at the high-speed discussion that we recently had live, which was a podcast episode a few weeks back. And you are currently in Spain, and you are quite busy with high speed, or you're involved in the high speed rail system in Spain. But by education, if I understood this correctly, you are an accountant. So tell us how this fits together.
Yeah, well, I'm an Australian, as you can hear from the accent. I grew up in Perth or in Fremantle. My education took me into business, or qualified in accountancy, and one thing led to another. I ended up in the UK, here in Europe, or various travels, and I've now been involved in rail for about 20, 25 years, including some rather high profile projects like Crossrail, Trendmarja, one or two other very interesting rail projects, which is not only take them into rail, but into certain high-speed rail projects as well. So with Australia now looking again quite seriously at the possibilities for high-speed rail in Australia, hopefully it all fits in nicely. Yeah.
So let me just stick for a moment with your mention of Tren Maya, which is a regional rail system, I understand, in Mexico. I have said for a long time that I personally differentiate between high-speed rail, which I tend to call very high-speed rail. So I'm talking about speeds of more than 250 kilometers per hour, and one speed level underneath, which I refer to as regional fast rail. Some people call it faster rail. You normally don't use speeds like this, say between 160 and 250, to connect major cities like, I don't know, Madrid and Barcelona, and probably also for connections here in Australia, long distance connections, say between Melbourne and Sydney, you would probably look at higher speeds. However, if you have shorter distances of, say, up to 200 kilometers, which in my definition is a typical range for regional fast rail, you can have connections between big cities and then smaller regional centers very, very efficiently at lower speeds. And in those cases, it wouldn't make too much sense to have really very high speeds, because the trains would very rarely hit those high speeds anyway. So Tren Maya, my understanding, is more a slower speed system. I think it's around 180 or something
160.
like 160.
Generally 160. Yeah. As I say, it was built in. It was an interesting project, shall we say. It was very political. I can tell you, I can, but I probably shouldn't tell you a few things about a few of the things that went on in the background of Tren Maya. But basically, it's over 1,500 kilometres of railway lines built to the high speed standard, built as a high speed rail, but in practice will probably operate at speeds of, as we say, 160, 180 kilometres to connect various important centres on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Like I say, it was built in 7 stages. It is planned as a mixed railway. By mixed, I mean mostly for passengers, but freight will also run over it at low peak or off peak times, very late at night. It takes into account the very high population centres of, not very high population centres, very high tourist centres of Cancun, and also Machu Picchu, Chichen Itza, the ruins there on the Yucatan Peninsula. So, it's to move both local people, but probably more importantly, tourists around the Yucatan Peninsula that fly into Cancun, and that's, hundreds of millions of people a year. So it was under very strict time scales. The Mexican government was adamant that it be delivered and opened before the end of 2023. That happened. A certain section, some section of the overall 7 sections that are being built was opened in December 2023. It's actually now, I think it's just now gone live in its entirety. There were some quite important environmental concerns because it was being built through basically rainforest, virgin rainforest. So yes, it was quite interesting, and it was certainly also quite interesting from an operational standpoint, which is basically where I mostly come from, to define and design, if you like, the service that they've now put into operation. So, yeah, very interesting project.
Yeah,
quite challenging.
Yeah. The reason why I brought this up is in Germany, there's also high-speed rail traffic, but they also have slower train services, the so-called intercity trains, which usually travel at speeds up to 200 kilometers per hour. And they also have regional express services, which travel at up to 160. And the rolling stock couldn't do more than that. So they basically have rolling stock that is suitable for the respective speed levels, which differ dependent on the different services. Do you have anything like that in Spain as well, or is it just the high-speed network and everything else is just more like, I don't know, suburban services?
I'd just like to go back to a very important point that you just touched on. There are services that are called high-speed services. Importantly, they are built and adjusted to the requirements. Yeah. So where there is not a requirement for very high speed rail, 320, 350 kilometers an hour, a lot of the railways are built in accordance with the requirements, whether that be journey time, whether that be topology or terrain or whatever it might be. But it's a quite important point because it enables countries and populations to take advantage of high-speed rail or higher-speed rail, which is much better matched to the requirements of those potential passengers. So yes, I've done a bit of analysis and following on from a very insightful report, an analysis and study that was done here in Spain on European high-speed rail, comparing costs and reasons for success, particularly here in Spain and France and Germany and Italy, where it's been very successful high-speed rail. But yes, there's a range of speeds which translate into a range of costs. Importantly, that meet the needs of the passengers at the right cost. And as we mentioned, there are various intercity services. All of those, mostly all of the inverted commas high-speed rail in Europe is built to European standards. Yeah. Now, whether you want to run at 300 kilometers an hour or 320 kilometers an hour, or whether it's more meeting the requirements at 180 or 200 kilometers an hour, you can of course design and build your railway and then run appropriate trains at the right level of speed and at the right level of cost across those high-speed railways that are built to a inverted commas European standard. And of course, that includes interoperability, so that here in Spain, we might have trains that, trains and lines that are built to the European standards. Well, we can run those trains across lines that go from Spain into France, into Germany, or from Spain into France down to Italy, and vice versa. France can run trains into Germany, or France can run trains into Spain or Italy for the same reasons, because they're built to a common European standard, and the railway lines and the trains are built and approved for those interoperability standards. Yeah, so that's also been a very, very positive thing for high-speed rail in Europe, that it's sort of opened up the continent as a whole, because Europe has adopted these standards and they build high-speed railways to these standards. Yeah. Okay. Standard gauge, ERTMS signaling, common standards for rolling stock, etc., etc., etc. Yeah.
Okay, I come back to these standards in a moment, but before that, I want to circle back on the topic of requirements that you mentioned, that the trains and also the speeds of the train system need to be adjusted to the actual requirements of the train system. Now, my question would be, where do these requirements come from? Who sets these requirements? I'm thinking of a recent discussion in the UK where for the high-speed 2 project, the plan was to run top speeds of 350 kilometers per hour, which is the highest that you can find anywhere in Europe and, in fact, anywhere in the world. I think there's no commercial high-speed train in the world currently that runs faster than 350 kilometers per hour. And a lot of people have questioned whether that speed of 350 would really be necessary for high-speed 2 in the UK for the connection between Birmingham and London. And some people may argue that it's simply a vanity metric in order to be the fastest in Europe or something like that. So who actually sets these requirements, and where does the consideration come in that higher speeds normally also means higher cost? Higher cost for the trains, for the rolling stock, higher cost to build tracks that can withstand higher travel speeds, and so on. So where should
track alignments, a more straighter track alignment to maintain those speeds, which in turn needs more tunnels, more bridges, more viaducts, which are the most expensive parts to build. Yeah, it's one thing to put a set of tracks through the plains where you don't have to accelerate to go up a gradient or go through or around a mountain or whatever it might be. It's the tunnels, the bridges, and the viaducts that are the expensive parts of the high-speed railway, and those things become more necessary for longer sections of track alignment in order to the higher the speed that you want to go. But it comes back originally to journey time, and which is the passenger's requirements. So to circle back to your original point, exactly as Australia is doing right now at this very minute, you need to undertake a very deep study and analysis of your demand, for example, amongst many other things as well. But it all starts with the demand. Who are you building this railway for? Yeah, and what requirements must it meet in order to attract that demand or that patronage that you want to attract, and make the project not just but economically viable, as well as meeting the other business requirements, if you like, of the overall high-speed project. And in that sense, it's much like any other project, whether it be a construction project or a software project. You need to fully understand the reasons why you are building something and why you were building it and who you are building it for, and what are so the original requirements need to be analysed. And particularly when we're talking about high-speed rail, the underlying demand needs to be very thoroughly analysed, including elasticities, to ascertain, why am I building this railway? Who am I building it for? And at what right level, do I need to set the design specifications for this railway, so that it best meets those original project goals and requirements, but at the same time isn't over-engineered or gold-plated so that it ends up costing an absolute fortune. And this is the number one lesson that I think we've all learned from observing or being involved with the HS2. I'm not afraid to say it, the HS2 debacle in the UK. I don't think there was anybody anywhere at any time that was screaming out for a 45-minute journey time between London and Birmingham. The underlying business case and rationale for HS2 was to increase capacity and release capacity on the very heavily congested West Coast Main Line by getting passengers off onto a new dedicated high-speed rail line to Birmingham and further points north, and release that capacity on the West Coast main line so they could run some additional paths, particularly for freight. Nobody's ever been able to turn up any analysis or study that said passengers were screaming out for a 45-minute journey time to between London and Birmingham.
Yeah,
so
I understand, but at the same time, you can probably tweak an analysis like this. For example, if you do a survey and you ask people, potential rail passengers, or maybe actual current rail passengers between Birmingham and London, whether they would prefer a travel time of 60 minutes or a travel time of 45. I almost guarantee you that 100% of people would say 45 is better. And that's then translated in saying, well, see, a higher top speed is more attractive because it reduces the journey time. Nobody will argue with that.
But it triples the cost. But it triples the cost. And the real question there is the elasticity. Yes, I'd like to arrive as quickly as possible, which means the train should go as fast as possible. But will I still catch that train if it's a 60-minute journey time or a 45-minute journey time? If the elasticity says, yeah, I will, and if the 60-minute journey time is half the price of the 45-minute journey time, does it make any difference? So transport economists, when they do these business cases, they use a formula called value of time. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard of value of time, but value of time is generally the way that they build the business case for these high-speed projects in the original instance, amongst many other things, of course. Now, value of time it's generally accepted. It's a bit rubbery around the edges, but it's generally accepted. It's the best measure that they've got. But it's basically along the lines of time is money. Yeah. So that's especially for business passengers. The value of their time it can sometimes increase the business case, and it's how, to be honest with you, and it's what Australia have done, and it's what Australia are redoing again at the moment. It's doing a full, thorough, very detailed analysis of that underlying demand and the elasticity of that demand, and applying huge formulas, as transport economists do, in order to build their business case and to try and pick through that analysis to say, well, where should we set our journey time? I mean, is a journey time between Sydney and Melbourne at 3 hours going to make that much difference between a journey time at 4 hours? If they choose 3 hours, obviously that has huge knock-on effects, because you need to build the railway to support speeds that are going to get passengers between Sydney and Melbourne at 3 hours rather than 4. If you choose 4, you can drop it down, drop the design requirements down a little bit, and get the railway built more economically, while still getting, if the elasticity says 90% of your passengers are still going to switch from air travel to high-speed rail, and they do the calculations on that, and then they pick through that to decide, well, we don't really need a 3-hour journey time between Sydney and Melbourne to meet our financial projections. If we build it at 4 hours, we still get 90% of the passengers, and that still gives us a business case ratio of greater than 1.
Yeah.
So then, of course, the design, the engineering and design decisions can then flow on from that. And I think that right there is where Spain and Europe have been very, very good in setting the level of their railway that they then go away and design to operate at the right level. Whereas, on the other extreme, of course, is HS2, which we've suggested and the evidence seems to point largely to it, that it was over-engineered, gold-plated, moved far, far away from what the general public or the demand was saying, because nobody was screaming out for a 45-minute journey time between London and Birmingham. Yeah, so that decision on a 45-minute journey time between London and Birmingham had the knock-on effect that they had to build the railway at a design speed of 360 to 400 kilometres an hour in order to operate trains at that speed to get passengers between London and Birmingham at 45 minutes, and that added enormous cost onto HS2, and we've seen the result of that. It's basically at least tripled in cost since the original studies and analyses were done, and the very first decision that was taken was, well, what journey time do our passengers want? And somebody came up with 45 minutes, and we can't find out where.
Yeah. I think your point that you made earlier about this elasticity, that's really a biggie. That's a huge takeaway from this conversation here, I believe, for me anyway, and hopefully also for people who think about the requirements planning here in Australia for high speed. So the question is not so much, would a passenger prefer a shorter journey time? The answer will always be yes. If somebody could travel from Melbourne to Sydney in 5 minutes, everyone would go for it. Everyone. Yeah. As long as it's not involved with bodily harm or anything like that. So 5 minutes is better than 15. 15 is better than 30. So it basically comes down to the shortest possible journey time, which will always be the most attractive, you would think. But then where the elasticity comes in is, well, if you have a longer journey time, if the journey time was 2 hours, if it was 3 hours, would you still be traveling regularly by train, or would you only do it when, I don't know, you're on holiday and you've got time to kill or something like that? So I would think, looking at the connection here between Sydney and Melbourne, and I believe it's kind of comparable with your connection in Spain between Madrid and Barcelona. I will come back to that. But again, it's two of the biggest cities in Spain, if not the two biggest cities in Spain, which are similar distances apart. In Spain, it's a bit shorter than in Australia, but still, I think it's reasonably similar to make some comparisons.
It's a very good comparison. It's a very good comparison. Yeah.
So I would think that a key requirement with regards to patronage is to tempt people away from air travel. Because at the moment, I'm not sure how it was in Spain before you built the high-speed line, but definitely in Australia, the most frequent travelers, which are clearly business travelers by a long distance, they're traveling by plane, because everything else is so much slower that it's simply not feasible, not affordable from a timing perspective to use these.
And their value of time, business travelers' value of time is higher, obviously. Yeah.
Exactly. So how do you get those business travelers away from air traffic and onto the train in significant enough numbers that the rail system, high-speed rail system, really makes sense and justifies the enormous investment? Because in any case, it will be an enormous investment. Yeah, you can probably ramp it up by a factor of 2 or 3 when you push the speed higher. But even if you go for a speed of, say, only 200 or 250, which then obviously has an effect on the journey time, the cost to build a connection like this over nearly 900 kilometers will still be significant in any scenario.
Definitely. But again, we go back to setting it at the right level. They're significant, and they're setting it at a level where it becomes uneconomic and unviable. You make the good point. Well, we've mentioned this. The situation, Madrid and Barcelona are the two biggest cities here in Spain by far. They are now the second and third biggest cities in all of Europe. Madrid and Barcelona, behind Paris. Yeah. The situation is very, very similar to the situation we've currently got in Australia between Sydney and Melbourne. Before high-speed rail was built, there was something like 55 flights a day between Madrid and Barcelona. They built the high-speed rail at the European standards to a design speed of a maximum design or a maximum operating speed of about 320 kilometres an hour, which, of course, that's something else that we need to consider. The maximum design speed or operating speed is not what's actually achieved, because you speed up, you slow down, you might stop at an intermediate station, you might not. The average speed obtained for that 621 kilometres distance between the train station in the centre of Madrid and the train station in the centre of Barcelona, the average speed's about obtained is about 225 kilometres an hour, and you end up with a journey time of about 2.5 hours, I think, from off the top of my memory.
How many stops do you have between Madrid Central and Barcelona Central?
It depends on the service, but I mean, the
speedy one, the most direct one, the shortest, the 2.5 hour one that you just mentioned.
The fastest one, I think, only stops once between Madrid and Barcelona. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the very fastest train. Yeah. Okay. That's probably during the peaks when business travel. The same as would be for Sydney and Melbourne. That's between 6 and 8 in the morning and 5 and 7 at night or something. They run almost express trains at the very highest speeds for the very longest periods. Yeah. And I think they do that in about 2.5 hours. Yeah, off the top of my head.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, there was previously about very, very similar numbers to Sydney Melbourne. For travelers in general, and particularly business travelers. There was what they used to call the air bridge of about 55 flights a day between Madrid and Barcelona. And I think currently today between Sydney and Melbourne, I think there's something like 57 flights a day between Sydney and Melbourne. So again, very similar.
We must have. I thought we would have had more. Maybe previously, maybe before COVID, we must have had more flights than. Qantas, for example, which is the Australian, the domestic Australian airline #1 for like forever. They are doing flights like every 10 minutes in the morning during business peak. They travel more often than the local train system almost. Yeah. So
every 15 minutes. Especially in the peak times. There was 9.3 million air travellers between Sydney and Melbourne last year, 2023. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think before the high-speed rail here in Spain, I think the equivalent number between Madrid and Barcelona was about 11 or 12 million. Yeah, so slightly more passengers between Madrid and Barcelona than there is even now between Sydney and Melbourne. Yeah, very similar numbers though. Yeah. Anyway, as I say, of those 55 flights. Of the air bridge that used to run between Madrid and Barcelona in 2007 before the inauguration of the high-speed line, about 60, Spain, by doing it correctly, has managed to capture about 60% of those travellers between Madrid and Barcelona now travel by the high-speed train. Yeah. So although the actual, if you like, in-vehicle travel time for aircraft over high-speed trains might be a little less. You have to factor in things like the high-speed train goes from the centre to the CBD to the CBD from the centre of cities. The airports are generally on the outskirts of the city, so you need that last mile. It's much more comfortable. You can work much more easily on the train with good Wi-Fi whilst you're in movement better on the train than you can in the air. It's just a much more comfortable experience all around. There's no problems with check-in. There's no problems with baggage. I'm a train nerd, but I mean, it's really a no-brainer that, particularly for business travel, that they've been able to achieve those numbers of the modal shift of passengers off air onto high-speed rail. And like I say, they've here in Spain, between Madrid and Barcelona, they've now reduced that 55 flights a day down to about 15 a day now. Yeah. So, just imagine if we get high-speed rail right in Australia, particularly between Sydney and Melbourne, because that's the jewel in the crown, let's be honest. If we can do something similar in Australia between Sydney and Melbourne with high-speed rail, we really that is our business case. We meet our business case. If we can move 40, 50, 60% of the passengers that are currently flying between very congested air routes between Sydney and Melbourne onto much cleaner, much more efficient high-speed trains between Sydney and Melbourne at a similar overall journey time that includes that last mile, that includes the hassle of getting through airports, that includes check-in, that includes baggage, that includes taxis, parking, whatever, all those things, that will be the success of the Australian HSR experience, is getting that right, analysing it right, building it right, so that overall journey time, and not just the in-vehicle journey time, the overall journey time is competitive on high-speed rail when compared to air travel. Yeah.
Okay. So what I would just like to stay there. I'm a big fan of what you just said, like doing it right. So I've been criticized before that I was critical of the idea of high-speed rail in Australia. But at the same time, I'm a huge fan of high-speed rail in Europe. In Germany, for example, I was a frequent user of high-speed trains because it made sense. So I'm not against high-speed in Australia. I'm against high-speed in Australia that doesn't make sense and nobody uses it. And I think that's something,
it overcosted, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that should be relatively easy to agree on, even with you, who clearly is a big fan of high speed. But you said as well, it needs to be done right and it needs to make sense. So while you were talking about this wonderful scenario where like 60% or so of air travelers come over to rail because the rail journey is so convenient, there were lots of design assumptions already woven in this model. For example, a point-to-point connection from city center to city center. So what I would want to see is when we assume that the train trip, high-speed train trip in Australia from Sydney to Melbourne really goes from city center to city center, I would think we should pick specific stations. So, for example, Central in Sydney and Southern Cross in Melbourne. But then we also need to think about, and we need to calculate this into our model, into our estimates, what it would cost to get a high-speed train to Central in Sydney and to Southern Cross in Melbourne. I sometimes have the suspicion that people just assume that the train will magically appear in the city center, but the cost calculation would only get you to the outer suburbs. Yeah, because building a high-speed line into a city will be horrendously more expensive than building it in the open land, because chances are you need to go underground for a significant number of kilometers, and those last miles, even though they are very important, they are also the most expensive of the entire trip. So the question would be, why can't I have a high-speed line terminating where an airport is? So, for example, Western Sydney Airport. But then everybody will say, no, we can't have that, because then it would actually take me longer to get from the high-speed terminus into the city center, and then the journey time comparison doesn't make sense.
this goes back to first principles of analyzing correctly your requirements and setting the service accordingly. Now, we've just said one of the requirements is that feeds into your business case is city centre to city centre. Okay, so to be fair, the original or the last deep analysis of high speed rail that Australia did back in 2013 analysed all these things as the passengers' demands or the passengers' requirements, which was, as we quite correctly say, city centre to city centre, Sydney Central to Southern Cross. So that then, as we say, the requirements then have that knock-on effect of influencing your design. And again, to be fair, to their credit, in 2013, they did that analysis to build those last mile tunnels underneath Sydney, underneath Melbourne, so that and the necessary upgrades and modifications required to Southern Cross Station and Sydney Central Station to facilitate and to meet that requirement for a city centre to city centre service. And that's built, and again, that's built in, baked into the design, baked into the cost, baked into the business case, that your service really only works and really only attracts the highest possible number of passengers with a city centre to city centre service. And again, in the economic case and the demand forecasting, that was one of the things that were analysed. Do you as potential passengers want to arrive city centre to city centre, or would you accept a service that terminates in Chatswood, or at the Victorian end that terminates in Craigieburn? And those are questions that were actually analysed and taken care of. And as is reasonable for us to expect, what the potential passengers wanted and what the results of that demand analysis came out as was that passengers want a service city centre to city centre, which then means that, okay, well, we now need to find a way to get the train into Sydney Central, or to get the train into Southern Cross. And so, yes, that requires tunnels. And so that cost of that last mile, or the tunnels underneath Sydney, underneath Melbourne, underneath Brisbane, that was all analysed and built into the potential costs and the potential business case in 2013. Now, of course, many other things have moved on since 2013. It's 11 years ago now. So what the Australian High Speed Rail Authority is doing now is redoing, updating and reviewing basically the results of that 2013 study, analysis and report, to again see what is the real situation, not in 2013 or 2019, what is the real situation now for passengers in 2024? Yeah. Are they still valid, those assumptions? What else has moved forward in the last 11 years that, that we need to go back and redo and review and update those original assumptions? And some things might have changed. A lot of it probably hasn't, but it needs to be reviewed and updated and adjusted for 2024 dollars rather than 2013 dollars. Inflation's gone through the roof. To come up with what is the real business case for high-speed rail in Australia at the right level in 2024, given that to build the whole network is going to take something like 40 or 45 years to build the whole network from Brisbane down through Newcastle to Sydney, to Canberra, to Melbourne, yeah?
I think one is important aspect, and we already discussed this during the live discussion that we had a few weeks ago, is the need for transparency. The results, the outcomes of those reports, of those studies, I think they need to be public, and they need to be subject to scrutiny. And I know that governments often don't want that because they don't want to be criticized. But on the other hand, I think it's very, very important for the robustness of the business case, and also for the wider acceptance of the business case, if people who know and understand about railway, people like you and I, for example, can look at those studies, can basically look at how it came about and can say, yep, that makes sense. That is realistic.
That matches my experience,
or
that doesn't make sense. Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm not assuming something nonsensical like the only way I can achieve my journey time is by trains going 300 kilometers an hour all the way into Sydney Central, which is simply impossible. It's physically impossible. Yeah. And if anybody has any comparison with, like in Madrid, Barcelona, the trains don't go into the city center at high speed. They slow down. The high-speed trains in Berlin and through Berlin, they are traveling. Well, if they travel 100, that's a lot. Probably rather slower than that. Simply because of the environment, and you can't have a train going high speed in the center of a city overground. It simply doesn't work.
No, this is where we talk about overall journey time. And right, let's go back. Transparency. Most definitely required. It needs to be, these things need to be published, if you like, in a certain fashion, so that they can be subject to peer scrutiny, peer review. Taking submissions, if you like, from industry professionals that might have a slightly different opinion. Frank might have a slightly different opinion than Sean, and we can work through that. Yeah. So agreed. The thing that did happen in Australia and will happen in Australia is because it's public, because it's government. The work that the Australian High Speed Rail Authority are doing at the moment, including the business case, has to be published. It's obligatory. It's government. It needs to be published. It needs to be open for consultation, and it simply must be presented to Parliament. It's the law. So that happened with the 2013 version. It happened with the 2019 version, and it will again happen it'll be the 2025 version of the business case for high-speed rail in Australia. I've been involved in
business case analyses here in Australia, and I kind of disagree, because the public version that's really put on government websites or so is at best a summary. The public never, in my experience, never got to see the underlying analysis. So they are basically presented with an outcome saying, we've done simulations and we think the journey time, or the simulations have shown that the journey time Sydney to Melbourne is something like what you have in your table, in your prep document here, 2 hours and 44 minutes. Where I look at it with some kind of common sense and 30 years of rail experience, saying, well, you probably lose half an hour either end just going to the suburbs, and then you have more than 700 kilometers in the middle, and you've got less than 2 hours to traverse those 700 kilometers. It does not look plausible to put it mildly.
Like I say, first things first. Sean Connolly, sitting here in Malaga, Spain, I managed to get the full version of the 2013 report, including all the underlying assumptions. So if Sean Connolly sitting in Malaga, Spain can do it, surely anyone can do it. Okay, I know where to look. Yeah, but
send me a link. You may have a better way of finding
huge.
These things. Yeah,
there's hundreds and thousand pages of horrible, deadly dry reading that I went through, but I was able to obtain that. Sean Connolly sitting here in Malaga, Spain, I obtained that report. Yeah. So if I can do it, anyone can do it. Basically, that was the first point. The second point, yes, what we need to make clear, it's transparency, but it's also transparency and communication. I mean, we say this was the thing in, if you like, to go back to our old favorite HS2, they said they were building a high-speed line capable of speeds of between 360 and 400 kilometers an hour. Yeah. What we need to understand is that whilst a line might be rated for a maximum speed of 300, 320, 350, 400 kilometers an hour, it's never, ever going to achieve that. It will achieve it for certain very straight, flat track sections. But over the overall, course of the whole journey, for example, the 621 kilometers between Madrid and Barcelona, or the 515 kilometers between Madrid and here in Malaga, the average speed that you obtain, which gives you your overall journey time, is generally somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of that. So when people thought that they were getting, a 360 or a 400 kilometre an hour train service between London and Birmingham, the train would have to achieve an average speed of 275 kilometres an hour, including the egress, the access and the egress into London and Birmingham over the whole length of the journey to achieve that 45-minute journey time. And I would have to question whether you can achieve an average of 275 kilometres an hour over the whole length of the journey from boarding to discharge.
Yeah. And it's exactly the same here. I mean, you have for the listeners who don't know that, you were probably the best prepared podcast guest that I have ever had, because you actually prepared a document with notes about high speed that are relevant for our discussion here. You sent that over to me. It starts off with a table from the high speed report in 2013 that you mentioned a few times, where we have certain high speed rail routes, we have the distances in kilometers, and we've got the journey times. And if I just start off with that, as you said, crown jewel, Melbourne to Sydney, which is in that table here with a distance of 824 kilometers and a journey time of allegedly 2 hours 44 minutes, you are very close to what you just said, average speeds of 275, 280, something like that. I haven't done the calculations, but it's 300. It does seem...
It's 300. If you do the simple maths on that, I'm very doubtful about that. And like I say, that's one of the reasons for the review, and it's one of the reasons for peer review. It is suggested in that 2013 report that they'd be looking for a 2 hour, 45 minute journey time for that 824 kilometres between Sydney and Melbourne. That would require an average speed, not a maximum speed, an average speed of over 300 kilometres an hour.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's achievable. Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly. Or to put it another way.
Yeah.
To put it another way, it is achievable, but it would cost so much to build a railway of an average speed of 300 kilometres an hour that it becomes unviable. Now, I think based on experience here in Europe and around the world, I think even if you build it to the European standards of, say, 320 to 300, around about 320 design maximum speed, which the train will achieve at certain points along the journey. But I think the best you could be probably looking at would be an overall average speed on a 320 kilometre an hour design speed railway and infrastructure. The best you could probably be looking at would be at 220 average speed, yeah. Which would get you between Sydney and Melbourne, rather than 2 hours 45, probably about 3 hours 45. But it just so happens that 3 hours 45 is still just about exactly the same overall journey time when you add in check-ins and waiting around in airports as Sydney, Melbourne in an aircraft. So again, that's something to go back on and something to review, and it's something that I'm sure is going to get done. Is a complete review of those if you like, ideal or actual passenger requirements for journey times, including Sydney to Melbourne.
Yeah. The thing is, if I see something like this, and I'm extremely happy that you, with all your high-speed experience, basically just confirmed that this journey time of 2 hours 44 looks unreasonable and very, very hard, if not impossible, to achieve. Yeah. So well, we share that assessment.
It's technically possible. Let's say it's technically possible, but it would cost a fortune to build. Yeah.
Exactly. So what I'm questioning, not just wondering about, what I'm questioning and what I'm doubting, is that the cost estimates in that report were really based on the extremely high standard that would be necessary to achieve a journey time of 2 hours 44. On the other hand, I'm almost certain that the patronage estimates were based on their journey time, which, however, is very hard to achieve unless you. So all the things of the business case need to fit together. Exactly.
It's all linked together, and you can't change the left without affecting the right, of course.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And
so let's say, and again, it's currently under review. There's an awful lot of work that's commencing now, and is going to go on for the course of the rest of the year, for the next year or something, in order to completely rejig and re-upgrade the business case. Let's say the business case in 2013, based on those assumptions, was something like 2.3 to 2.5 value of time and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. If we say that, an overall journey time Sydney to Melbourne, more likely, more reasonably, more economically, is 3 hours 45, which still competes with aircraft, rather than 2 hours 45 at average speed of over 300 kilometres an hour. If that then comes to pass, then of course the business case ratio, value of time, et cetera, probably drops from 2.3 to 2.5 to 1.3 to 1.5, maybe. I don't know. That's for the there's an awful lot of work that needs to go into that in demand modeling, demand forecasting, revenue, value of time, all that sort of stuff. So, but it is definitely all linked, and of course, a longer journey time, whilst it may still be competitive and acceptable to the customer, of course, has the knock-on impact of reducing your overall business case ratio. But at the end of the day, the business case ratio is put together on certain criteria, and a lot of these criteria in business cases come left, right, and centre from everywhere, and some of it's not an exact science. It is somewhat subjective. It just needs to be considered, in inverted commas, reasonable rather than exact. I mean, we make an awful lot of assumptions when we're building business cases and studies and modelling, and all those assumptions need to be reasonable, and they need to come to pass in order to end up with that result.
Yeah. And I also think that some of the assumptions or some of the arguments are painted a bit too rosy, depending on what you want to achieve. So for example, one argument that I often heard, and you mentioned it as well just a minute or so ago, is people don't mind a slightly longer journey time on the train because it's more relaxing. I can relate to that. So the seats may be more comfortable, but again, that's a design assumption that really needs to get into the design. And that means if I have seats on the train with more leg room, I can get fewer seats on the train. That I need to. I can't assume I'm pressing the same number of passengers on a high-speed train as I do on a metro train in Sydney or something like that.
No,
and if I want longer leg room, more leg room, because that's a key argument to make the journey more comfortable compared to air traffic, then I need to plan my number of seats even lower, even more generous.
The overall passenger carrying capacity. We say, let's say a third of the business air travel between Sydney and Melbourne, a third is at business class or first class, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. The same, the train manufacturing companies know this. Let's take Siemens, for for an example. And again, it's an assumption, but it's a reasonable assumption because these trains are in service. Yeah. A particular Siemens train that I'm using for the sake of the example, they operate at a capacity of 450 passengers, of which 1/3 also are business class or first class accommodations. So again, these are as we've mentioned, these are the assumptions that we need to validate in order to take an overall view of the confidence level that we've got that this is actually going to be achievable. Yeah.
Another thing is that notion of passengers will be able to work on the train. So you're basically not losing the journey time. You can use the journey time on the train productively by doing some work. Now, this work or this notion of people working on the train is probably based on the assumption that everybody has a laptop and all you need to provide is Wi-Fi on the train, which of course needs to be reliable, and then maybe a charging point. Yeah. But what about those people? And there are quite a few of them who said, well, my normal work day is having 300 phone calls per day. So if I lose, say, 4 hours per direction on the train journey, that's 8 hours. During that time, I'm normally doing at least 200 phone calls. Can I do this on the train? Probably not, because either
you can do this on the train, but you can't do that in the air.
No, you can't do it on the air, but you may argue that the time I'm actually spending on the air or in the air where I can't use my phone is a lot shorter than the time I'm spending on the train. That's an assumption that I'm making, and I'm still waiting for the counter argument. Okay, well, so what I'm saying, what could be done, and for example, in an open office environment, there are these things considered where, for example, you have a quiet area where phones are not to be used. There are train services, including in Germany, probably in Spain as well, where you have quiet carriages where if people really want to be in peace and quiet because they just want to type on their laptops, that's the place to be. There may be other carriages with maybe small pods, almost like a telephone cell, where people may be able to go in there for a phone call. Yeah.
Whatever it is, Frank, this goes back to first principles that we've mentioned a number of times, and analysing correctly the demand, analysing correctly the requirements. Yep. And again, this was done in the original 2013 report. It's done here in Spain. It's done in, I'm sure it's done in Germany and France as well. Yeah. Where, okay, as a part of the demand, you say, well, in order to capture this business travel market, 60% of, yes, they want the business market doing the analysis. What they want is a train that the Wi-Fi works, a bit more leg room, electrical socket, an area for quiet time or whatever. All these things are built into the original design. So then, of course, when we know the demand requirements, we then go away and we say to Siemens, for example, your train must. In the business, your train must maintain the Wi-Fi connection, electrical socket at every seat, nice business class accommodation, so on and so on and so forth. So again, by going back to first principles, we understand the demand, we understand what we need to achieve and what we need to deliver, and then everything flows off from that. You know, we need to provide the shortest journey time possible. So Siemens, what sort of train can you build me that meets A, B, C, D? Yeah, because we need to achieve A, B, C, D, or otherwise our business case goes out. Yeah, so we put that into our requirements for our train manufacturer because we've analysed those requirements and we understand our requirements that we need. So that goes out, and then of course it flows on. Our track alignment. If we need to achieve an average speed of 250 kilometers an hour for 824 kilometers, then yes, we need to build a tunnel here. We need to build a bridge here. We need to build a viaduct there. And that all flows on. And then if that number comes up, it's too high, we say, well, perhaps at 220, average speed of 220 kilometers an hour, we can do away with that tunnel. We can do away with that viaduct and still meet our business case. Yeah.
Hi, it's Doc Frank again. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't miss out for part 2, which will air next week on Thursday, the 25th of April. The second part of my conversation with John Connolly. Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry, and I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share. And until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Thank you for listening.